James Morady wasn't just growing corn, he was continuing a legacy. His grandfather's rare Golden Sunset sweet corn variety had been in the family for generations, surviving wars, dust bowls, and industrial farming's takeover. The vibrant golden kernels carried a sweetness no commercial hybrid could match, with hints of honey and summer sunshine that lingered on the palate. When his grandfather passed 3 years ago, he left James a hand-carved wooden box containing exactly 48 seeds and a weathered journal detailing 7 decades of careful cultivation. These aren't just seeds, his grandfather had told him during their final garden walk together. They're stories waiting to be told. In his meticulously planned suburban garden behind his modest craftsman home on Maple Street, James transformed an ordinary backyard into what neighbors called the Corn Cathedral. Raised beds lined with cedar-formed perfect rows, each positioned to maximize sunlight exposure throughout the day. A sophisticated drip irrigation system designed and built by James himself delivered precise amounts of water to each stalk. No detail was overlooked. Classical music played from weather-resistant speakers each morning. Mozart for growth phases, Vivaldi during pollination periods, custom fertilizer blends adjusted for soil chemistry tests, and hand pollination using small paintbrushes for optimal genetic expression. The neighborhood had initially mocked his obsession. "There goes crazy corn guy," they'd whisper when he spent entire weekends testing soil fit levels or installing specialized UV-reflective panels to extend the growing season. Linda from across the street had even organized a petition against his agricultural eyesore when he installed the 8-foot trellis system. Everything changed at last summer's block party when James brought 6 dozen ears of his freshly harvested corn, simply grilled with nothing but a light brush of butter. "I've eaten corn my entire life," Mr. Peterson, the 82-year-old neighborhood patriarch, had declared, butter dripping down his chin, "but I've never actually tasted it until today." The conversion was instant. Neighbors began offering their yards for expanded growing space. The local organic grocery inquired about exclusive purchasing rights. A renowned chef from downtown offered him a staggering amount for his entire harvest, which James politely declined. This wasn't about money, it was about honoring his grandfather's legacy. Now, with the county fair 6 weeks away and a $5,000 prize for heritage vegetables, James had larger ambitions. The Regional Food Council's head judge had made a special visit last week, examining his growing methods and taking detailed notes on his meticulous record-keeping. 3 separate farming magazines had requested feature interviews, and a seed preservation society had offered grant funding to document his family's cultivation techniques. Most exciting of all, competition scouts from the prestigious Heartland Heritage Foundation, the organization that had rejected his grandfather's applications 17 years in a row, had been asking for private viewings of his crop. Their approval would mean national recognition and permanent inclusion in the American Heritage Seed Bank. In the quiet mornings, as James knelt in the soil checking each silk for proper development, he'd sometimes feel his grandfather's presence. The way the light filtered through the tall green stalks created a cathedral-like atmosphere where past and future seemed to merge. His girlfriend Melissa had left 6 months ago, unable to understand his corn obsession, but James knew he was on the verge of something transcendent. His corn wasn't just plants, they were his tickets to opening the small farm-to-table restaurant he dreamed of since culinary school. Roots would feature heritage crops and traditional cooking methods, honoring the agricultural wisdom that industrial farming had nearly erased. He'd already sketched the dining room layout, with one wall dedicated to his grandfather's photographs and farming implements. As he brushed soil from his hands after another successful pollination session, James gazed at the gently swaying stalks. 6 more weeks until harvest perfection. Nothing could possibly go wrong now. The morning dew clung to the grass, sparkling like diamonds in the early sunlight as James made his way to the garden for his daily inspection. A robin chirped nearby, and the air smelled of fresh soil and promise. James carried his inspection clipboard and his grandfather's magnifying loupe, ready to document the weekly growth measurements that would complete his data set for the Heartland Heritage Foundation. Something felt wrong before he even reached the garden gate. A subtle shift in the arrangement of stalks, an interruption in the careful geometry he'd established. The sensation crawled up his spine, the way his grandfather had described feeling when frost was coming, a farmer's intuition. "No," he whispered, dropping his clipboard as he rushed forward. The violeted stalks stood in silent testimony. 5 of his prime specimens, situated in the northeastern corner where morning sun exposure was optimal. The cuts were clean and angled at precisely 45 degrees, not the jagged tears raccoons would leave, nor the messy breaks from wind damage. Someone with knowledge had harvested these. Someone who understood corn. Most disturbing was the selection pattern. Only the prime ears had been taken, the ones that had received his specialized calcium-potassium supplement 3 weeks earlier. The less developed ears remained untouched even when they grew on the same stalk as the stolen ones. This wasn't random, this was targeted. Impossible, James muttered, kneeling to examine the soil. 3 distinct footprints led from the garden to the property line he shared with the newly developed luxury homes. The ridge pattern wasn't from any gardening boot he recognized. The tread was minimal, almost like a designer walking shoe. By noon, James had installed motion sensor lights strategically positioned to illuminate the garden without disrupting the corn's natural night cycle. A local security company had offered to install a proper system at cost after hearing about the theft. The owner's wife had been one of the corn converts at last year's block party, but James declined. Too many wires, too much disruption to the soil ecosystem he spent years perfecting. Instead, he purchased 3 wildlife cameras disguised as birdhouses and positioned them at varying heights throughout the garden. He programmed them to capture 5 seconds of video when triggered by motion, with infrared capability for night recording. He couldn't sleep that night, sitting at his kitchen window with a pair of binoculars, scanning the garden until dawn broke. As days passed with no further incident, anxiety built like storm clouds on the horizon. James began checking the cameras obsessively, installing a mobile app that sent alerts to his phone with each activation. Most footage showed squirrels, the neighbor's cat, or branches moving in the wind. He started bringing breakfast and lunch to eat in the garden, working remotely from a small folding table positioned for maximum visibility. His friend Miguel, concerned about his growing obsession, convinced him to install a small hammock between 2 sturdy trees at the garden's edge. "You can't guard it 24/7, man. At least be comfortable while you're being paranoid," he'd said. For 3 nights, James slept under the stars, the gentle rustling of corn leaves serving as his lullaby. On the 4th night, exhaustion from weeks of disrupted sleep caught up with him. Miguel brought over sleeping pills, practically forcing James to take one. Even soldiers in combat zones need rest, bro. One night of solid sleep won't hurt. The bitter irony wasn't lost on James when he awoke at sunrise to find another 7 ears missing, the exact 7 he'd identified as potential blue ribbon winners in his journal. This time, the thief had grown bolder, venturing deeper into the garden's center. They left behind more evidence: a partial footprint in the freshly watered soil near his prized center row, and something else, the faint but distinctive scent of expensive perfume lingering around the violated stalks. Something floral with sandalwood undertones, certainly not a fragrance anyone would wear for garden work. The cameras had captured something too. A blurry figure in pre-dawn light moving with decisive familiarity through his carefully plotted rows. The image wasn't clear enough for definitive identification, but it revealed someone of medium height wearing dark clothing and, most telling of all, latex gloves that reflected oddly in the infrared lighting. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was calculated. James stared at his laptop screen, rubbing his bloodshot eyes as the video footage played for the 7th time. The timestamp read 5:18 a.m., just before sunrise. The infrared mode gave the scene an eerie greenish glow as a figure moved purposefully through his garden rows. This time he positioned the camera at a better angle, capturing the intruder's face as they briefly looked up while selecting an ear of corn. "You've got to be kidding me," James muttered, hitting pause and zooming in. The footage revealed Karen Lawson, not just any neighbor, but the current president of the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association, a position she campaigned for aggressively after moving into the neighborhood's largest house just 8 months ago. Her real estate bio described her as a community advocate and tastemaker, but most residents used less flattering terms behind her back. Karen had made waves immediately upon arrival, distributing a 16-page neighborhood enhancement proposal that included restrictions on garden sizes, mandatory color schemes for exterior features, and a controversial ban on non-ornamental vegetation visible from the street. James had spoken against these proposals at the community meeting, earning her cold stare and pointed remarks about certain elements resistant to progress. But the corn theft wasn't merely personal vendetta. James typed Karen Lawson catering into his search bar and his stomach dropped as the results loaded. Lawson's farm-to-table experiences featured prominently with a sleek website showcasing her new upscale catering business that had been receiving rave reviews over the past 6 weeks, precisely when his corn had begun disappearing. The site's splash page featured Karen in an impeccably white chef's coat, holding a platter of golden corn fritters drizzled with what the caption called heritage honey glaze. Further clicks revealed her signature menu items: heirloom sweet corn souffle, golden sunset corn chowder, and grandmother's secret corn pudding. Golden Sunset. She hadn't even bothered to change the name. James scrolled through the company's Instagram feed, where each post received hundreds of likes and gushing comments asking about her secret supplier for such exceptional corn. "It's all about sourcing the right ingredients," Karen had replied to one comment. "Some things can't be bought in stores or even farmers markets." At least that wasn't a lie. When he zoomed in on her kitchen counter in one promotional photo, James nearly knocked over his coffee. There in the background, partially visible behind a copper mixing bowl, sat a pile of husks with the distinctive purple tinge edges, a genetic marker unique to his grandfather's variety, a result of cross-pollination experiments in the 1970s that had created the corn's signature sweetness. The magnitude of the theft suddenly expanded beyond the missing ears. Karen wasn't just stealing corn, she was stealing his heritage and profiting from it. Each stolen ear represented not just the current loss, but future generations, seeds that would have continued his grandfather's legacy. Using the neighborhood directory, James found Karen's catering calendar posted on the local business network. Her prices were staggering, $175 per person for a premium dining experience, with corn-focused items commanding an additional surcharge as rare heritage selections. She had 3 events scheduled for the coming week alone, including a private dinner for the mayor's office. James dug deeper, finding reviews that praised her corn dishes specifically. "Unlike anything I've ever tasted," wrote a local food critic. "Lawson has somehow procured a variety of sweet corn that transcends the ordinary." When pressed about her supplier, she merely smiles and says, "Family connections." The final piece clicked when James received an unexpected email from the Heartland Heritage Foundation. They were reconsidering their interest in his corn submission due to similar varieties already being evaluated from the region. The representative mentioned being quite impressed with samples provided by Lawson Catering last week. James sat back, the full picture now clear. Karen wasn't just a thief, she was a calculated businessman who had recognized the value of his grandfather's legacy and was systematically building her reputation on stolen property. And now she was threatening his chance at official recognition, the dream his grandfather had pursued for decades. His hands shook as he closed the laptop. This wasn't just about missing corn anymore. This was personal. James approached Karen at the farmer's market where she was selling locally sourced produced baskets. With neighbors watching, he calmly presented printed screenshots of her social media beside his garden camera footage. Instead of showing shame, Karen laughed, flipping her highlighted bob. "Nobody owns the rights to corn, James. Besides, your little hobby garden was wasted on you. I'm actually doing something meaningful with it." When James mentioned trespassing laws, Karen's husband, a local judge, appeared, suggesting James should be careful about making accusations without proper evidence. Walking away, James overheard Karen telling onlookers he was mentally unstable and imagining things. That night, he found his garden fence cut in a new location. James sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by research materials and agricultural journals, a clock on the microwave reading 3:28 a.m. Sleep had become a distant memory in the 3 days since the farmer's market confrontation. His laptop displayed a paused video conference with his former culinary school professor, Dr. Amelia Chen, now a food science researcher at Cornell. "It's not just about revenge, Amelia," he had explained earlier. "She's destroying my grandfather's legacy. 40 years of careful breeding, gone in a season if she plants those seeds." The professor had nodded, understanding the genetic preservation concerns. "I'll send you some contacts, but be careful, James. This is walking a fine line." Now, as dawn approached, James studied the email from Chef Marco Valdez, his former boss from his time working at Fusion, a molecular gastronomy restaurant in Chicago. Marco had become famous for creating extreme hot sauces under his Inferno Labs brand. His latest creation, Eternal Damnation, had made headlines when 3 diners were hospitalized after ignoring serving size warnings. "What you're asking for is next level, amigo," Marco had written. "Pepper X extract isn't a condiment, it's practically a chemical weapon. 10.3 million Scovilles. For reference, police-grade pepper spray is around 5 million. I'd attach safety protocols. This isn't a joke." James printed the handling instructions, studying the warnings about chemical gloves, eye protection, and ventilation requirements. The overnight delivery was scheduled for tomorrow, a plain box containing what looked like a small medicine vial of clear liquid. The $1,200 price tag had depleted his restaurant savings fund, but it would be worth it. While waiting, James reviewed his plant genetics textbook from the university extension course he'd taken last year. The chapter on selective kernel treatment outlined the techniques agricultural researchers used to modify individual kernels, while leaving others untouched, originally developed for testing genetic modifications without contaminating entire crops. His time in the molecular gastronomy world paid off as he formulated his plan. The restaurant had taught him precise techniques for ingredient transformation, how to infuse, extract, and alter foods at their chemical level. What most people saw as kitchen tricks, James recognized as scientific processes that could be applied with surgical precision. When the package arrived, James transformed his kitchen into a laboratory. He wore his chef's white coat more from habit than necessity as he carefully unpacked the supplies: nitrile gloves rated for chemical handling, protective goggles, several medical-grade syringes with ultra-fine needles, a digital scale accurate to 1/10 of a gram, and the star of the show, a small vial of pure pepper X oil. Handling requires full precautions, Marco had warned during their follow-up call. This stuff is so potent it can burn your skin through regular latex gloves. One drop, literally one drop, is enough to make a pot of chili inedible to most humans. I'm sending you 5 mole, which is frankly terrifying. Working with methodical precision, James selected 12 perfect corn ears from his latest harvest, the ones with ideal kernel formation and distinctive purple-tinged husks that Karen would immediately recognize as the premium variety. He laid them in a row on his butcher block, tagging each with small numbered stickers to track his work. Using techniques borrowed from both food science and his grandfather's seed preservation methods, James created a specialized injection protocol. The colorless, odorless pepper X oil would be strategically introduced into specific kernels using a microsyringe, creating a pattern that wouldn't be detected until several bites in. The human tongue has no defense against capsaicin at these concentrations, Marco had explained. It bypasses normal taste warnings. First bite might taste fine, and boom, nuclear meltdown. James worked with surgeon-like focus, carefully mapping each ear with a diagram, injecting precisely measured doses into kernel space throughout each corn cob, enough to ensure that no matter how the corn was prepared, the heat would be evenly distributed through any dish. The pattern he created was deliberate. The first few kernels in each cluster would remain untreated, ensuring the initial taste would be the sweet, honey-like flavor his grandfather's corn was known for, before the pepper X revealed itself. When finished, James treated only the ears on the garden's perimeter, the ones Karen typically targeted, and installed a new higher-resolution camera with night vision. The regular corn in the center of the plot remained untouched, perfect for his upcoming fair entry in seed preservation. James stood back, admiring his handiwork as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his garden. Unlike a conventional trap with obvious bait, its approach required psychological finesse. Karen was no amateur thief. She was calculating, observant, and cautious. Direct confrontation had failed. Now subtlety would succeed where accusations couldn't. The centerpiece of his strategy was a small programmable irrigation system he'd installed that morning. Rather than functioning primarily for watering, it served a more cunning purpose, creating distinct rhythmic clicking sounds at 5:30 a.m. precisely when neighborhood security cameras showed Karen beginning her daily jog. The sound would serve as both attention grabber and cover noise for her movements. Perfect, James murmured, testing the timer one final time. The gentle clicking started just loud enough to draw curiosity without alerting other neighbors. Next came the informational bait. James carefully composed an email to himself from the Heartland Heritage Foundation, detailing an upcoming confidential prejudging inspection scheduled for next week. The message specifically mentioned the judge's interest in examining his premium center row specimens with purple-tinged husks and included language about how this year's winner would receive national media coverage. After printing the email, James highlighted key passages with yellow marker, added handwritten notes in the margins about which specific corn ears to showcase, then deliberately left it in his recycling bin, the blue container positioned near the property line between his yard and Karen's. This wasn't a random placement. 3 weeks earlier, his wildlife camera had captured Karen methodically sorting through his recycling under the guise of checking for proper separation of recyclables in her role as HOWID president. She'd lingered particularly long over discarded seed catalogs and agricultural correspondence. The trap was multi-layered. Karen wouldn't just take any corn. She would be led to believe she was taking specimens specially selected for the judges, the very corn that could finally earn his grandfather's variety the recognition it deserved. The temptation would be irresistible for someone building a business on stolen authenticity. James positioned his treated specimens strategically. The 12 ears with the pepper X injections were arranged near the garden's edge but protected by a new section of decorative fencing that would require deliberate effort to bypass. Each ear displayed the distinctive purple-tinged husks that would immediately signal their premium status to Karen. Nearby, he placed a small stake with a ribbon tied around it, a common marker used by agricultural judges to identify contest entries. The timing aligned perfectly with Karen's schedule. His research showed her catering company's biggest event to date was scheduled for tomorrow evening. A retirement gala for Mayor Whitman, a lavish affair with over 200 attendees including county officials, business leaders, and local celebrities. The connection between the prejudging inspection corn and her need for premium ingredients for the important event created the perfect storm of opportunity and motive. That night, James didn't hide in his garden or sleep in his hammock. Instead, he sat in his darkened kitchen, iPad propped on the counter streaming the live feed from his new high-resolution security camera. The night vision technology provided crystal-clear footage despite the darkness. At 2:17 a.m., movement at the garden's edge caught his attention. James leaned forward, watching as a figure in black athletic wear approached cautiously, looking around before slipping through a gap in the fence. Karen's distinctive profile was unmistakable in the infrared lighting as she methodically moved between the rows, cotton gloves on her hands and a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The grand ballroom of the Oakwood Hills Country Club had been transformed for Mayor Whitman's retirement gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with arrangements of hydrangeas and roses. A string quartet played softly in the corner as the town's elite mingled, champagne flutes in hand. James sat alone in his living room, his dinner untouched beside him. At precisely 7:30 p.m., he opened his laptop and navigated to the town's social media page where the event was being live-streamed. The camera panned across the ballroom, finally settling on Mayor Whitman at the head table alongside his wife, the fire chief, the superintendent of schools, and the library director, the power center of Oakwood Hills. Karen appeared on screen in a fitted burgundy dress, personally directing her staff as they prepared to serve the first course. Her catering company's logo was prominently displayed on the screen as the town's social media coordinator narrated. Tonight's exquisite dining experience provided by Lawson's Farm-to-Table Experiences, featuring Karen Lawson's exclusive heritage corn selections. James leaned forward, watching intently as waiters in crisp black uniforms served small plates to the head table. The camera zoomed in on Mayor Whitman receiving the signature appetizer, miniature corn fritters with honey drizzle garnished with microgreens. The mayor smiled approvingly, lifting one to his mouth as Karen looked on proudly from the side. Our family recipe dates back generations, she was explaining to the table. The corn is a rare heirloom variety with naturally high sugar content that caramelizes beautifully when fried. James felt a twist in his stomach. They were his grandfather's exact words, stolen like the corn itself. The mayor took a bite, nodding appreciatively. Remarkable flavor, Karen, he said, reaching for a second fritter. The superintendent followed suit, popping an entire fritter into her mouth. The fire chief, a barrel-chested man known for his expertise in competitive chili cook-offs, took two at once, commenting on the perfect sweetness. James checked his watch. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. The Pepper X was designed to create a delayed reaction, just enough time for the initial sweetness to register before the capsaicin bound to pain receptors. At 45 seconds, Mayor Whitman's face changed. He paused mid-sentence during a conversation with his wife, linking rapidly. He reached for his water glass, draining it in one desperate gulp. The superintendent stopped laughing at whatever joke had been told, her hand rising slowly to her throat. The fire chief, who had consumed 2 fritters, was the first to visibly react with force, his face flushing crimson as he stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. What in God's name? He gasped, a live-stream microphone picking up his words clearly before he descended into a coughing fit. The camera operator, confused by the sudden commotion, panned across the head table. The mayor's complexion had turned an alarming shade of red, sweat beading on his forehead as he frantically loosened his tie. The superintendent was gulping wine directly from the bottle, tears streaming down her face. The library director had submerged her face in the ice sculpture of a town hall, desperately seeking relief. Within minutes, the elegant event devolved into chaos. Guests who had been served the appetizer were displaying various stages of distress, some fanning their mouths, others chugging whatever liquid was available. One city councilman dunked his head into the decorative fountain. The live stream caught a distinguished elderly woman scraping her tongue with a linen napkin.